Imagine you want to learn English, and you see this word right here, and you don't know how it's pronounced, you don't know what it means, it's totally new to you. But you know these three words over here, and you know how they are pronounced. You know that this is through, sourdough, and enough. Now, you see that all of these words are written with O-U-G-H in the end, but it's always pronounced differently. U-O-Af. So now you have to think, how is this word pronounced? Is it like ku? Is it ko? Or is it kaf? To talk about the way how words are pronounced, we use something called the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is just a collection of symbols to represent sounds. In this video, we will talk about how it's unique, how it developed, and why it's important. And it doesn't matter who you are, what you're doing, if you're just learning languages, if you're a linguist, if you're interested in both linguistics and language learning, you will definitely need it. Even Gilbert over here says it. It's very important to talk about pronunciation in all ways of language. So let's talk about the basics. The main principle behind the IPA is that one symbol represents one distinctive sound, and it's used for phonetic and phonemic transcription of any oral language, so only for spoken languages, not for example sign languages. What phonetic and phonemic transcription are, we will talk about later in the video. Also, it has three other goals, which are first of all universality, that it can be used to cover all sounds of all languages, and it has to be precise, to allow for precise and nuanced transcriptions of speech sounds, and it has to be flexible, so that it can adapt to new findings in linguistic research, and that we don't have to create a new phonetic alphabet for every discovery that we make in linguistics. Over here, we can see the whole chart of the IPA, but for now we will focus on the top part right here. And what you can see is that a lot of the symbols you see right here, they are based on the Latin alphabet. This is simply because it was designed by French and British linguists and language teachers, so it's heavily influenced by the Latin alphabet, of course, which they use. Talking about the general history of the IPA, it was created in the late 19th century by the International Phonetic Association, also IPA for short, which was established in 1886. But only later renamed into the International Phonetic Association. Their goal was to create a universal system for transcribing the sounds of all spoken languages. This was just to aid in teaching and learning of pronunciation of words in certain languages. It was of course influenced by previous phonetic alphabets, because it was the first phonetic alphabet, but was unique in its aim for universality. And one of the predecessors of the IPA was the Romic Alphabet. If you want to learn more about the Romic Alphabet, let me know in the comments. We can make a video about this. Just let me know, but it's very similar to the IPA. And of course, the IPA underwent multiple revisions, and the most recent and significant one was in 2005. Now, how is the IPA used? It's used usually in phonetic transcription, language teaching, and fieldwork. Phonetic transcription just means it's used to transcribe the sounds of any language, and especially in linguistics to analyze and compare phonetic structures of languages. In language teaching, it's used to help learners understand the precise pronunciation of words, which is especially useful when native orthography, so the way words are written, is non-phonetic. This, for example, we could see up here, where the O-U-G-H is always the same written, but phonetically it's always pronounced differently. U-O-Af. In fieldwork, the IPA is used to document lesser-known or endangered languages to create accurate records of phonetic details for future studies in linguistics. Now, let's talk about the structure of the IPA. First, we'll talk about the pulmonic consonants. How is this chart built? First of all, in the horizontal axis, we can see the place of articulation. This describes where in the vocal tract the sound is produced. On the vertical axis, we see the manner of articulation, which describes how the sound is produced. Sometimes you can see symbols in pairs. This describes that the one on the right is a voiced consonant and the one on the left is a voiceless consonant. Let's talk about the place of articulation. Bilabial describes sounds that are produced using both lips, like in pa, ba, ma, and other sounds. Repeat after me so you can feel what your mouth is doing, so you can actually understand what is happening in your mouth to produce these sounds. Labiodental describes sounds articulated with the lower lip and the upper teeth, like in fa and va. Dental describes sounds articulated with the tongue against the upper teeth, like in tha and tha. Alveolar describes sounds which are articulated with the tongue against or close to the superior alveolar ridge, like in ta, da, na, sa, or za. Postalveolar describes sounds articulated with the tongue near or touching the back of the alveolar ridge, like sha and ja. Retroflex describes sounds where the tongue has a flat, concave or curled shape, and it's articulated between the alveolar ridge for alveolar sounds and the hard palate, used for palatal sounds. Examples for this are da and da. Palatal describes sounds where the tongue of the body is raised against the hard palate. This, for example, includes sounds like hya and ya. Velar describes sounds articulated with the back of the tongue against the soft palate, or the velum. This includes sounds like ka, ga, ha, or nga. Uvula describes consonants articulated with the back of the tongue against or near the uvula. Examples for this are ra. Pharyngeal sounds are consonants articulated in the pharynx. I'm not a native speaker of languages where these sounds are used, but this sounds something like ha. Glottal describes consonants where the glottis is used as the primary articulator. So this, for example, includes ha, or the glottal stop, which is used, for example, when you say uh-oh. That in the middle, the uh-oh, that is the glottal stop. Now, let's talk about the manner of articulation. First, we have the plosives. Plosives are consonants in which the vocal tract is blocked so that all airflow ceases. Examples are pa, ba, ta, da, ka, ga. Nasal sounds are occlusive consonants allowing air to escape through the nose, like in ma, na, la. Trill sounds are produced by vibrations between the active and the passive articulator, for example, ra. Tap or flap sounds are produced with a single contraction of the muscles, so one articulator, for example the tongue, is thrown against the other articulator. An example for this is ra. Fricative sounds are produced by forcing air through a narrow channel by placing two articulators close together. Examples for this are fa, va, za, sa, za, sha, ja, and others. Next, we have lateral fricatives. They are again like fricatives, where airflow is forced through a narrow channel, but lateral means that the airflow is along the sides of the tongue. This again are sounds I'm not native of, but this sounds something like xia. Approximants are sounds where the two articulators are placed close to each other, but not close enough to have a fricative sound. Approximants fall somewhere between vowels and fricative sounds. An example for an approximant is ya. Lateral approximants are again like approximants, but the airflow is along the sides of the tongue. For example, la. So, now that we're done with the consonants, we go on to the vowels. The vowels, similarly to the consonants, have a horizontal axis, a vertical axis, and pairs. The horizontal axis describes the backness of the tongue, so how far back the tongue is in the mouth from front to back. The vertical axis describes the height of the tongue, so how high the tongue is positioned in the mouth from close to open. The pairs describe whether the vowels are rounded or not. The backness makes the difference from ü to u, the height makes the difference from I to ä, and the rounding makes the difference between I and ü. Just try to pronounce some vowels so that you feel what your mouth is doing, so you better understand the concept of backness and height. So next we have the diacritics, which are symbols added to the base symbols. For example, these and these, to describe slight variations in pronunciation. So for example, you have the small h for aspiration, which describes a small puff of air coming out of your mouth, which makes the difference from da to ta. Also, you have nasalization with this little symbol over vowels to describe that airflow is directed through the nose. If you're interested in learning more about all these diacritics here, let me know in the comments and I will try to make a video about all of these to explain what they are and how they affect a sound. Lastly, we have suprasegmentals, which describe features like stress, whether a song is made long, half-long, short, and so on, where syllables break, and also it describes tones, which appear, for example, in Mandarin and Cantonese. Now that we have talked about all the symbols in the IPA, it's important to know how the notation of these symbols work. There are many different ways, all for different purposes, but the most common ones are with square brackets and slashes. Square brackets are for phonetic transcription, so they represent the actual sounds of speech. And for example, the word cat, depending on where the speaker comes from, not necessarily how I pronounce it, could be phonetically transcribed as this, like cat. So you can definitely hear the aspiration after the k, k, a, t. This symbol over the t means that there's no audible release. Again, some speakers do this, some speakers don't. But with this way you can really choose yourself how far you want to go into detail, how much you want to describe. Slashes are used for phonemic transcription, so they represent the phonemes. Phonemes are the distinct units of sound that distinguish words in a language. So you could call this a simpler way of transcription, and for example the word cat could be transcribed like this, cat, because these are the sounds that are distinguishing words in English, so this is for English specifically. And if you don't know what phonemes or phones for phonetic transcription are, click the video on the screen right now. There I explain exactly what they are and what you need to know about them to really advance your understanding of the notation used by the IPA, so go check it out. And if you're still here now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, and see you next time.